So good morning, everyone. My name is Bob Schukai. I'm the global head of mobile technology at Thomson Reuters, and I'd say right now I got the best looking panel of anybody up here to talk about enterprise. Nobody up here really looks enterprise except me, and I apologize for that. I cut my hair a couple weeks ago after doing rock camp in Las Vegas, where it was a little bit longer. But the topic of enterprise, I think, is a tremendously exciting one, and we've got some great speakers here for you. Just a little anecdote. So in 2005, I joined Turner Broadcasting from Motorola. And the power of mobile really was well understood at Turner. When you look at CNN on your iPhone, if you're a fan of Adult Swim and you've ever played Amateur Surgeon or any of the other really cool games that come out, you know, the consumer side of the business, the media side, really embraced mobile in a big way. In 2010, I moved to Thomson Reuters. And it was a bit like stepping into the past. And I think that's often the case when we look at enterprise. Enterprise tends to be a lot slower at adopting technology. In fact, one might argue that in many ways with the BYOD phenomena, for example, IT people are actually seeing technology and seeing mobile rammed down their throat. It's coming as a CEO top-down thing where, you know, the CEO says, hey, I want my email on my iPad, and voila, things happen. That said, the enterprise also has tremendous opportunity, and why is that? Enterprises have money, and enterprises pay for stuff. And that's a very, very good thing when you're sitting out there trying to think about, do I do a startup? But that comes with a lot of challenges and a lot of issues. And some of the things that we're going to explore, and it'll be, first question I'd like to kick off with you guys is, you know, when you think about the products that you've created, what's your approach been to be successful getting into the enterprise vis-a-vis the business model itself? Because it is a very tricky thing with longer cycles to sell in, the pull that you actually get from consumers to bring products in, that end around that we do around the IT managers. And just let's start it off there and see what you guys think. Well,
Early on for Xobni, because we did Outlook products to get started, we hit a lot of enterprise customers. And I remember one story, we got a call from the Royal Bank of Scotland, and they had found 250 versions of Xobni in the Royal Bank of Scotland, and they don't allow IP access at all for their employees. They literally can't ping outside the walls of the Royal Bank of Scotland. And they were wondering how we had infected these 250. I was like, ask the employees. They used a thumb drive to install the product from like machine to machine. And I said, well, you're right, it is. Like, why would you want them to have instant access to data? This would be terrible. You should take it off immediately. So we had... I'll tell you what we learned about enterprise customers. We had just as many small business customers and individual as we did people working at large Fortune 1000 companies. The conversion rate for small businesses was 10 times higher than it was for enterprise customers. So enterprise customers, as a freemium customer, a free to premium, wouldn't take out their wallet as much. But I remember one day we had 9% of Microsoft employees logging into the product daily. At one point we had something like 6% of HP employees logging into the product. And I don't know, we started an enterprise team to sell to them. It was miserable because the enterprise products come with, when you do enterprise as a full-fledged enterprise company, they come with all the overhead of doing a $10 million deal. If you're doing a $1 million deal, a $10,000, it just was onerous. So I think the solution that we came up with that we liked, that Dropbox seems to be going to, Evernote may do as well, which is on top of your freemium product, you add a Teams product. The Teams product still builds roughly the same way with a credit card, but instead the manager might take out their wallet, pay for their whole team, and then the license accrues to the team as opposed to the employee. So if the employee leaves, the license gets redistributed to a new team member. And that worked pretty well, and it allowed us to not talk to the enterprise, which was like the goal.
From heaven, yeah.
Yeah, we like to talk. We would have to talk to salespeople or the marketing people, but not talking to enterprise was, I mean, if you're going to do a deal with an enterprise, you may as well do a deal with AT&T. Like, laugh or not at that. You may as well do a deal to be on every mobile device. It's about the same overhead to get into a large enterprise from our perspective as it was. Anyway, I could go on forever. Enterprises are interesting, but...
Yeah, well actually, so I'm David from Expensify. We do expense reports that don't suck. I'm sure that resonates because I'm sure every conference is relevant because everybody has expense reports no matter the topic. Anyway, but I'd say the...
10% discount today. Everyone is in here.
But it's 10% off of free.
That's right.
And so I'd say, yeah, but exactly what you're saying resonates strongly with us. I'd say our approach to the enterprise was frankly just not to think about it. And I guess one of the best things we ever did was realize we just had no idea how this whole space worked, and so came into it with no assumptions. And so certainly Expensify is enterprise software, and that we basically, generally when a customer signs up, we take over the whole company. So it can be used on an individual basis, but it's primarily something for the whole company. But I would say, whereas 80% of our users sign up through our mobile apps, most of our revenue actually comes from users who are brought into the system virally through word of mouth. And that's because for expense reporting, it's naturally viral. Every time you submit an expense report, you put us in touch with someone more important than you, like your boss, your finance department, and things like this. And so it sounded radical at the time that when we came out with Expensify. The notion of using mobile apps to acquire individual employees and then allowing the viral dynamic of the company to basically empower the employees to promote us to the decision maker. It's crazy. It just sounds like it could never work, but in fact it works great. And so I think, but to your point about how do you penetrate the enterprise, and I would say that the classic challenge has always been, it's like, oh, let's just layer on an enterprise sales force. But once you do that, then you become the thing you're disrupting. And like in our case, Concur is the Microsoft of expense reports. They're even in Seattle. And basically we find that they have a very high cost of sale enterprise model. And our angle, yes, our product is better in certain ways, and yes, it's flashier and things like this, but we sell at a cost of sale that's an order of magnitude lower than them, which allows us to penetrate, to establish a foothold in a part of the market that no one else can even survive, and then to use the base of the market to lay siege to the classic enterprise. And so I think the way you approach the enterprise is to not just sort of adopt their techniques, not to refine their techniques, but to change the techniques radically, such that you're approaching it from an entirely different playbook that they can't even begin to comprehend. And I think there's ups and downs to that. It's great having a different model, but the downside is no one can comprehend it. And so no one believes it works, but it works awesome. And now we're talking with companies like, and I think the other thing I would say is being incredibly patient. I mean, Expensify is not a young company, but now we're just starting to talk to companies with deal sizes into the millions of dollars. The Fortune 500 companies. And it's taken years and years to get to that point. And we had to work our way and scrape our way through these small businesses to get up to the large enterprises. But rather than sort of viewing them as alternatives, it's like the small business base is what creates the overwhelming word of mouth and allows the viral dynamic to grow into the enterprise. And so if I could summarize, the strategy for the enterprise is just don't think about it. Just focus on making whoever loves your product so happy, and then just keep, following, chase that as far as it goes. And if it takes you to the enterprise, awesome. But if not, that's cool. The world's a big place.
Raj, your thoughts?
Do you agree the world is a big place, Raj?
Of course it's a big place. After Saul's speech. Absolutely. We're obviously not monetizing yet, so I'm not going to comment on that side. But I'm going to tell you a story of sort of when we were figuring out how to penetrate the enterprise. This goes back a year ago. We were building Tempo, the smart calendar, and we said, hey, should we start running pilots? This was a question we had internally. So should we go and choose 5 or 10 enterprises, get their sales team, have them start using the app, and see what the output of that was? I don't know if this is... OK. We did that. We went and talked to some salespeople, and we had them start playing with Tempo, and we were getting feedback and input and seeing how it was working. And so then what happened was we were using this feedback. We were custom developing the product like you normally would, sort of lean startup philosophy. We wanted to start running some more blind user testing. And this was an interesting inflection point because we weren't sure, should we go and get more of this similar kind of persona, or should we try different kinds of personas? So we put together the survey. We posted it up on Craigslist. And we had some really interesting questions. And there were sort of 2 versions of the survey. And we'd A/B test the survey, where we had some that were very calendar-centric kind of questions, like, do you have a lot of meetings? Do you run from meeting to meeting? And others were like, what's your hobby? What do you do in your free time? It was a complete sort of other end of the spectrum. And what was interesting, we wanted to do this really just to sort of validate some persona theses, is we brought in people to blind user test with that we basically didn't expect to have a busy calendar. So a barista, I remember this barista came in, and I was running that user test. We had literally just the family planner, students, all sorts of different folks. And what was most fascinating out of the user test was how useful and different the things that they found in the smart calendar were. And it sort of drove this conclusion that if you want to penetrate the enterprise, you really need to be a horizontal sort of application. And we really think about 9 to 5. Yeah, that's the prosumer. But how about 5 p.m. to 9 a.m.? That's the consumer. And that was the realization that really came out of user tests. And what's interesting now is when we run our user tests, and we continue to run user tests, we certainly have a good sample of the VC-type calendar with tons and tons of meetings. But we bring in all the sorts of demographics of users that you wouldn't expect to have a lot of meetings, just to see how they use Tempo and how they interact with it. And that continues to feed into the experience.
So actually, one thing that I would, if you're thinking about doing enterprise, one thing that I thought of is that Expensify in some ways will have an easier time in the enterprise market than maybe Tempo and Xobni does, partially because there's a distinct budget around how expense reports work. There's someone that it goes to. There's a VP of, there's a cost associated with what they understand. Xobni, one of the problems that it runs into in enterprise is they say, well, who should pay for this thing that it adds 4% productivity improvement? Because IT, which may have the budget, says, well, we don't care if people are 4% more productive. We don't get paid for that. First time you hear that, you think like, just say it again slowly. I thought you don't care? And they're like, well, it's not our job. So I was like, oof. So the problem is if you have a product, and sometimes in the freemium space, we want to do something that the consumer loves and the consumer is passionate about, but the enterprise may not be structured in a way to pay for those. And in the event that they don't have a distinct budget that you can take from, you get into a much longer sales cycle than you otherwise would, because you will have a couple of VP converts and they'll pay for their team, but it's as much effort. It's just much easier if they say, we're paying vendor A, we could pay vendor B.
When you guys are all talking about something that I think alludes very well to this question that I'd like to ask the three of you. So I think a lot of us probably use Evernote, Dropbox, LinkedIn, whatever. I was a LinkedIn user probably from day one, and John Lister's here somewhere. I never paid one dime to LinkedIn until they added this cool feature of who's spying on my profile. And I'm happy to pay $10 a month to know who's going to be calling me in the next few weeks because of this use of the data. So the question I'd ask you guys, and maybe it's a good question that everybody would think about is, and we'll start with you on this one, David, what is the value of a free user? At the end of the day,
that's a great question.
It's really a tough thing to justify, isn't it?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think to the point on Tempo in that, and actually maybe I'd like to ask a question to you in a bit, basically about the horizontal, the nature of having a horizontal product. And what we found is that, and it's very similar, we have this expense tracking is relevant to everyone who spends money. Whether or not you're in a company, whether or not you reimburse expense reports, anyone who spends money has an interest in basically understanding how their spending happens. And this means that we have a huge range of these individual people, using us to track health savings accounts, students on budgets, families, and all sorts of people who have very sophisticated sort of expense tracking and analytics, entirely outside of a company who will never ever pay for expense reporting because they don't submit expense reports. And early on, we were wondering, it's like, well, I guess we have zero marginal cost user acquisition. We have incredibly low marginal cost to support our users. We don't want these people to go away, but like, do we care about them? At the end of the day, I think we realized that this massive base of these individuals and these consumers are the most important aspect of Expensify because they're the ones that create the word of mouth. Because word of mouth is a numbers game, and ultimately you want to have the largest army pulling for your brand. And if you have something that addresses 1% of the people who work in enterprise, or something that addresses 100% of people, it's like you want the 100% to be championing for you, whether or not they pay you. Because realistically, every dollar you get, you're going to plow back into customer acquisition, and it's like, the customer acquisition is very inefficient. Just skip the money phase. Have people just pay you in people, their friends, their family, their boss, and so forth. And so I'd say having the consumer angle is just absolutely critical to our model. It took us a long time to fully understand that, but now I think we really believe it.
Raj, your thoughts on that?
I can reiterate what David said. When we started Tempo, I had never really ever used Salesforce before. And I remember spending 2 months and going and talking to all these VP of sales. And I just had this perception that people wanted to use it for fun. It was sort of, it helped them in their own productivity. And I came out realizing that it was completely managed down and forced down their throats. And it was sort of the exact opposite. So this self-adopt model, actually building something that the user actually likes, I think is really powerful. And I kind of take the approach is sort of just like concentric marketing. You start with a core set of users that are really happy, they're your champions, and then you build on top of that and start expanding into more and more circles, and that's sort of what we're seeing.
There are some good horror stories about free users, though. No, there's one thing that if you're going to be in the enterprise freemium space, your numbers look a little different. So a lot of markets are used to 99% free users, 1% upgrade, right? That's kind of like the YouTube, 1% make content, 99% consume it. Flickr had like 99% free users, 1%. You see it over and over again. In the enterprise-y space of the freemium business, the best in class is more like 10% conversion. So I don't know where Ken is. I read once Evernote after 2 years has something like 40% conversion, which makes sense if you're with it that long. You love it so much that you pay. Your paying customers are actually your easiest customers. They're the most forgiving. They love you. They pay you. They feel invested into you. They self-identify basically as lovers of the company. And oftentimes you'll set a bar for them and say, if you're above this bar, you pay. If you're below this bar, you don't. They'll pay anyway, which I always appreciated very much. The free users, which I also enjoyed and enjoy, it is funny that when you'll move the bar, occasionally you'll re-release a product, change a new category for pay or do whatever, and they'll tell you, fuck you, I want to kill you and your family, blah, 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 and you're like, how dare you, I'll never use your product again. I'm like, I'm so sorry that your free product, you hate me now because I've made it. There's like a pay category that insults you theoretically because the product's exactly the same and you were grandfathered in and whatever, and I just remember like, it's about a week every time we do those changes, I'm like, everyone, winter is coming. We're going to change the pricing model, and the free users will not be affected, but they believe they will be, and it'll be theoretical, and they will come after you, and they will hunt you down, and they will send shit to your house, and you'll be like, and they will tell you, how dare you, I will never use your free product. I'm like, oh, shit, we just saved 4 cents. Anyway, no, but they also had some of the better ideas, too, so I appreciated them.
So we're going to open up this to questions in just 1 second. I want to leave you guys with one last opportunity. If you were going to give one piece of advice to startups out there trying to reach the enterprise, the business space with a product, what advice would you offer them? And Raj, if we could start with you.
I'm going to reiterate some of what I said earlier. I think the key is you need to be useful to both the prosumer and the consumer. And it's kind of walking that sort of tightrope in terms of where you want to focus. I know we didn't talk about priorities and figuring out when you make that sort of transition to more teams. But we spend a lot of time user testing on both sides. And we have fan bases on both sides. And some people use calendars as purely for holidays and purely for Facebook events or just a list of tasks. And so there's a whole range of sort of different users and trying to appeal across that base. So don't fall into the trap that I did a year and a half ago of sort of starting with the persona that I thought would be the most powerful sort of user persona and actually keep it horizontal.
Excellent.
And so I would say if you want to do a bottom-up sales model, so if you're going to enterprise, first ask, like, why am I not just going to copy the incumbent? And probably because they're already there. And so if you want to go from the bottom up, I would say probably the most important lesson is to have a product that the company can either buy or ignore, but can't turn off. Because that allows you to get the penetration into the bottom that, get your champions activated, that allows them to sort of promote you over time, because it requires this sort of slow burn. It's not about, with normal paid acquisition, it's kind of like you're lighting a match and throwing it at kindling. It just bursts into flames. It's amazing. But this is really about fanning a flame. It's like you've got this huge, huge pile of somewhat damp wood. And so it just takes time to allow it to sort of catch on fire. But once you have it forever. And so I think that being able to be unstoppable as your users pull you into the organization, I think is key.
They said something earlier I liked, which was when you do a consumer to enterprise type company, a bottom up, you never forget that if you're going to approach it that way, the product is for the end user, it's not for the company. And that was the hardest piece, which is when you have people and you start selling the enterprise, they feel it's necessary. They can't help themselves. They start making requests to make it more enterprise friendly. And I remember telling our sales guy that was working on enterprise deals at the time, he would ask for something and I said, but the product's not for them. And he just looked at me like, well, we're asking them to pay money. I said, but it's like the honor of paying to let their employees have products that they already love. We make the product for the employees love it. The enterprise may choose to pay for it because it's the right thing to do. It makes their employees happy, more productive, et cetera. But it's not an enterprise product. It's not for them. We're not making features for them. So it's very hard. And you'll get dangled. We would pay you $1 million if you'll do this. And you're like, it's not for you. It's not your product. So it is, when you're a consumer product, making products for consumers is easy enough. When you're a consumer product where you're serving consumers who are often in the enterprise, you will have this day where somebody dangles it in front of you and says, it's time. We've been playing in the consumer space. Now it's time to become an enterprise. And you're like, nope, it's not for you. It's not your product. I appreciate if you pay for it. I think it's a good idea. I can give you cases why it's a good idea to pay for it and why it's a great return on investment. But we got to where we were because we made a product that consumers and end users loved, and that's the only way we'll sort of survive against. Because hand-to-hand combat with Microsoft or Concur or whomever. I don't want to do it. They've been taking people to golf and buying expensive bottles of wine for longer than I've been around. So you're just not going to beat them at their own game of schmoozing and paying for people and bribery. I'm sure all sorts of bad shit happens.
And I think if I take my moderator hat off for a second, the single biggest thing we've done at Thomson Reuters to redefine our game is recognizing that the iPad being the single biggest thing, in my humble opinion, transforming the enterprise. When you've got consumer applications sitting next to enterprise applications, the things you have to remember that, guess what? They're human beings, and there's this work-life blur, and design matters, to your point. If you build a great product, people are going to love it, and they're going to come back and they're going to use it again and again. What are your guys' thoughts in terms of mixing and matching product? You know, the things that IT lay down versus the things that people bring in through the back door, and the concerns over security that IT have. You know, if I use a product like Evernote, if I use a product like Dropbox, my stuff is sitting in the cloud. It's not sitting on a secure server. These things do get hacked. What are your guys' thoughts in terms of how do we create that mindset that says, yes, we can use these consumer, prosumer type solutions safely and effectively?
There are businesses who look for that sort of enterprise-grade security. It's almost too, for some, you're a consumer anyways. They can't really stop you, which I thought was an important point. But in the event that they do try to stop you because they believe that it's less secure or something, it's too far an uphill battle for those users. And you don't have to hit every enterprise. You don't have to win so you don't have to go after Lehman Brothers. I know they're not here. You don't have to go after a bank because they have these unrealistic security expectations. But the sort of funny thing in my mind is whenever I hear enterprise grade, I'm always like, ooh, 100,000 users. Oh, maybe we'll scale to be like that. Like, you should try to do 500 million users, like consumer grade. That's the real scale. That's true uptime. That's true pain of growth and scalability. And you think security for enterprise is just a series of painful walls, but it's not like the enterprises aren't being hacked on a daily basis. The Chinese probably have a download of every single company's back end. I assume they have everything. Everything in China. Just walk over there and it's there. There's a Vegas there, we just haven't found it. And so this concept that they're somehow more secure, it's just insane. And so going after CIOs who are living in this dream that somehow enterprise security or anything is a higher bar than what the consumer side faces. Consumer side, you have a security breach and that you lose everything. You lose if you have a serious security breach on the enterprise, right, it's these incremental small little islands of data. So the consumer side generally has more to lose, more likelihood of being attacked. I mean, they have just more intensity on it. And it's true that you could have a startup that's not up to snuff on security. That would be bad. But overall, if you have a good startup with experienced people who come from security grade or consumer grade security backgrounds, you'll probably be able to far exceed. Xobni eventually passed the US Army's certification, which we didn't know we were being certified by them, but it was like 2.5 years later they told us, you're now certified to be used by the US Army. And we're like, that's cool.
So maybe a point on that, I would also kind of challenge the necessity to meet a lot of these obligations. Or rather, I'd say, I think enterprise sales is not just going through a transformation how software is sold, but how it's bought. I would say for our largest enterprise customers, I think they've concluded, and the reason they've come to us is it's relatively easy to buy software. Integration actually isn't even that hard, I would say, but it's deploying to the end user that's the hard part. And so I'd say that our concerns that we're facing, we actually don't, we're secure and all this stuff, but I'd say that really it is, how do I deploy this to my users in a way that they're going to accept and not just puke all over? And I think that's the change that's happening on the enterprise is they actually want to be sold a different way, and I think they want to buy in a different way based upon the recognition that employees matter. And I think that's a new thing.
Best advice I've heard on this topic is to just be aware. So at least educate yourself on what are some of the CIO sort of demands. So when you're ready, or if need be, need to make some of that switch, you can do it without being sort of blindsided, and you can architect some of these things into your product earlier than later, so it doesn't become this sort of massive migration after the fact.
Thanks, Raj. I think we got one question here. We probably got time for one, right, Leah?
That's interesting. So I guess in general, I would say that conversation just hasn't really come up, even in the largest customers. And I think it's because the way the sale is happening is there's no guy that has a checkbox and it's like, oh, I got to ask about ownership and all this sort of stuff, because we're not doing a competitive bid. Nearly everyone we talk to is not out shopping for expense reports. They're just reacting to the fact that their employees are demanding it. And so I think that changes the entire sales conversation, and you skip the whole sales phase where it's like, do you meet my checkbox? And just go straight into the integration phase, and you just don't have that discussion. That said, I think you're right, especially, maybe this is a key point, when you're dealing with a product that has both consumer and business purposes, you don't work for the company, you work for the individual, and it's their data. And that means that you have to resolve the privacy concerns around them basically. So I guess our attitude, and I know this is a great answer, is the user owns the data. It's not the company. The company owns some of the data. Like when you submit an expense report, that becomes their data. But really, it's really the user's data primarily. And so I don't know if I really have a great answer to you other than it seems like one of those things that would be really, really important. And I think it is very important when you're doing a top-down classic sales process, but it just hasn't really come up.
Guys, thank you very much. Audience, please.